Alright, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is time for APHUG Lesson 7.6. In today's lesson, we discuss the following words. Number 1, footloose industry. Number 2, comparative advantage. Number 3, supply chain. And number 4, just-in-time delivery. So those are the words we're going to learn about today in lesson 7.6. Now it's time for everyone's favorite review question. That's not what I meant. Now it's time for everyone's favorite segment, the review question. And hey, guys, watch the end of the video and figure out the answer to the question, okay? Don't turn the video off before the answer. You can scrub through and find the answer. Make sure you know the answers, okay? Because today's review question is, when Subway, the restaurant, with the sandwiches, okay, so when Subway restaurant opens a new location in Brazil, which of the following is occurring? Okay, so Subway, the restaurant with the sandwiches, when they open up a new location in Brazil, which of the following is occurring? Is it A, development loans, B, outsourcing, C, vertical integration, D, opening a maquiladora, or E, foreign direct investment? Okay, so your choices are A, development loans, B, outsourcing, C, vertical integration, D, opening a maquiladora, or E, foreign direct investment. Please select your choice. Alrighty, so word number 1 is footloose industry. Doesn't have anything to do with the movie Footloose, except for that footloose means free, right? In the movie, it's like footloose and fancy free and dance. Okay, so in a footloose industry, you're free. Free from what, you may ask, right? Well, free from all of those costs we've been talking about. Okay, so it's an industry that doesn't really have to consider if they're weight gaining or weight losing. The product weighs exactly the same at the beginning and the end. And the material that they need for their industry can be found anywhere. So they don't really have to factor in specific land costs or specific labor costs or specific raw material transportation costs. They're free to locate wherever they want to locate. We always like a good example to help us understand the words. So, footloose industry, what's a good example of something that can locate really wherever it wants to locate? The answer is computer chips. Computers are pretty important. I think you're probably a big fan. You're probably on one right now. And, but I bet you might not know what computer chips are made out of. So computer chips are made out of silica sand. Silica sand is one of the most available resources on the face of the earth. So in every continent you can find this silica sand that you use to make the computer chips. Doesn't matter where you locate, you're able to get a source of this near to where you'd like to have your factories. Rather than being dependent on an exact location, it's rather just dependent on a country wanting to start this computer chip industry. Okay, so computer chips, an example of a footloose industry. Do you know the number 1 computer chip making company out there in the world? It's Samsung. Do you know where Samsung is headquartered? South Korea. So I'm going to put up a picture now of the manufacturing locations where Samsung has their factories. And you'll notice that most of them are in South Korea, a couple are in China, and then one is in Texas. So overall, because the computer chips can be manufactured anywhere, but remember, we said the other day that the Asian tiger countries, like South Korea, use the money that was poured into them to get going with different industries so they could become really competitive in the economy. And South Korea really chose to put their efforts into tech, and because computer chips can be located anywhere, it made it a great idea to have computer chip manufacturing in South Korea. Some other places they make computer chips are, of course, Silicon Valley in California. So we have the American company Intel, which is the number 2 computer chip manufacturer. And then our third computer chip manufacturer is also one of the Asian tiger countries. It's Taiwan. There's a company called Taiwan Semiconductors, and they make the third most amount of computer chips. All right, so to sum it all up, Footloose industry, you can locate wherever you want because you're free. You don't need to be in any particular location. And our example of the day was computer chips. And because what they're made out of is an available resource all over the world, because silica is one of the most available elements on our Earth. And we saw in the example that Samsung and Taiwan Semiconductors are 2 companies located in Asian tiger countries to prove what we talked about the other day. All right. Our next word is comparative advantage, because you might want to be the best country in the whole world and make everything. But if you make everything, then you have to devote people and hours to making those things. And sometimes it might be better to make a trade-off. And you take the resources, the people, and the time, you take them away from one industry, and then instead you put it towards something else that you're better at making. Okay, so the comparative advantage is asking yourself, what can I make the best with the least amount of trade-offs? All right, so every country has to ask, what can I make the best with the least amount of trade-offs? All right, so here's an example. The question is between 2 countries. This is a fictitious example. So we've got China on one hand, and we've got Italy on another hand, and we're going to say that they are making shirts and bicycles. Okay, so in our fictitious example, we've got China and Italy. Okay, we're going to say, for example purposes only, that in China it takes you 1 hour to make 1 shirt. And it takes you 2 hours to make 1 bicycle. Okay? So something that matters in comparative advantage is something called the opportunity cost. What are you going to lose if you give up and you make something else and you don't make the one thing? Okay, so if you make 1 shirt and you devote all your time to that, then you're not going to be able to make half a bicycle. If you make the bicycle, you're going to give up making 2 shirts. Okay, so if you make the shirt, you're going to have to give up making half a bicycle because you can't put the time towards both things, let's say. And if you make the bicycle, then you're going to give up making 2 shirts in this example. Okay, so in Italy, let's say in Italy it takes 3 hours to make a shirt and 5 hours to make a bicycle. Okay, so if you make the shirts, you give up 3/5 of a bicycle, and if you make the bicycle, you give up 5/3 of a shirt. So the example was trying to say, well, Italy is not really good at making either one of those things, really. They're not super efficient, but because China is good at making the shirts, right? So let's say that China has the better advantage in making the shirts. So China should make that, and they should partner with Italy and let Italy make the bicycles. Okay, so even though maybe Italy doesn't have the absolute advantage in making bicycles, but they have the comparative advantage because they're going to partner with China, Italy has to give up less making the bicycles than China does. There was an economist in the 1800s named David Ricardo who came up with this example. He looked at England and Portugal, and he predicted in his book that England was just better at making cloth, so they should specialize in that, and Portugal was better at making wine. So instead of trying to both make those things, they should focus on one that they had the comparative advantage in and let the other country produce the other thing, so that you create a trading relationship. So England made the cloth, they traded it to Portugal. Portugal made the wine, they traded it to England. So this just tells us that it's not always that countries can make everything. Sometimes it's better to take those hours and put them in things that matter more to you than to put those hours into making everything. Okay, one more example about the comparative advantage stuff is call centers in India. So, the United States wants to save hours, right? The opportunity cost for them is not that much to give up these call center jobs. They don't really want to have to pay Americans to answer the phone. Americans could be doing better jobs, right? Like more important things that would help the economy even more than just answering phones. So they looked to India because Indian people speak English, and they outsourced the jobs to India. Now maybe people don't speak English perfectly in India, so that creates some problems, right? Maybe it'd be better to have the people in terms of like fluency to be here over in America. But we don't really have to give up that much in order to let the call centers be in India. So it frees up our workers to do other things, and it gives the workers in India a job. So India has the comparative advantage in call centers. Okay, word number 4 is supply chain. So a supply chain exists where parts are assembled into components that are joined together to create a larger finished product. So basically everything out there needs to go from the raw material and be converted and get all the way to the finished product. And along the way, it also needs to go on trucks and get transported like we've been saying, right? Okay, so all the different pieces that are brought together to get the product from the original state to the consumer are part of the supply chain. So the steps including moving and transforming the raw materials into finished products, transporting those products, and then distributing them to the end user. So things that are involved in the supply chain are the producers, the vendors, the warehouses, the transportation companies, the distribution centers, and the retailers. So I found the example of the clothing company Zara. So I'm going to put up on the screen for you the supply chain of Zara. So you can see that in the case of Zara, it starts with the idea of the designer in Spain. So the design is created, and then it's sent to the company, and then they create the fabric for the designs, and then after that they're actually created, and then they're distributed to the stores, and then in this case, because it's clothing and it's not that much clothing, it's flown all the way to New York City, for example, and it's in the stores in Manhattan. And so they were pointing out this example, it only took 25 days to go from an idea to a piece of clothing. So Zara has really streamlined the supply chain to make sure that they are able to quickly get clothing out there so they can change the trends really quickly so that they don't have like a lot of stock that in things that people don't want to wear anymore, because it only takes less than a month to go from an idea to clothes in the store. All right, our last word for today, word number 4, is just-in-time delivery. Okay, so there are 2 different inventory ideas out there. Companies, we forget sometimes that they also need to pay for the warehouse space to keep components of things that they might need to put into the finished product, okay? Especially, say, like cars. Okay, so there's 2 strategies out there. One, you can have a huge warehouse where you keep all the things that you need, right? Or you could have really, really good communication with the people that make the components, and right when you need them, you can call them up and have them delivered to be put into the thing that you're making. So the second strategy, where you use computers and you call those companies and you get it directly delivered right when you need it, is called just-in-time. Okay, so this obviously requires that you really know how much you need, because if you ask for too much, you're going to lose money because you'll have it just sitting around. You didn't need it yet. If you ask for too little, you're going to lose money because the whole plant will have to shut down and you won't be able to make anything because you didn't buy enough of the pieces. So it's a little bit of a gamble, but in some cases, especially with cars, they figure they can save a lot of money by not having to put all of these things in warehouses and just pay for the space. Okay, so they employ this strategy to increase efficiency, decrease waste by receiving the goods only as they need them for the production process, so it reduces the inventory costs. Okay, this is also called the Toyota production system because the car company, Toyota, was one of the ones who pioneered this idea back in the 1970s. Basically, They ask for the things just right before they need it so they don't have to pay a lot of money for the inventory. All right, now we're going to go back to our review question. So the question was, Subway restaurants, they open up a new location in Brazil. Which of the following terms is an example of what's happening here? So your choices were development loans, outsourcing, vertical integration, opening a maquiladora, or foreign direct investment. And if you picked E, foreign direct investment, you are correct. Great job.